2 people are dead in Manitoba, the first civilian wildfire victims the province has seen in recent memory. 2 Canadian provinces have declared states of emergency. Tens of thousands have been forced to leave everything behind. More than 800 wildfires are now burning across the country, with over 700 of them completely beyond containment. Smoke from those fires has polluted the air for more than 100 million people, and even crossed the Atlantic Ocean into Europe. And perhaps the most unsettling part of this entire story is this. According to Canada's own wildfire experts, this is still considered a below-average fire season, which raises an uncomfortable question. If this is what a quieter year looks like, what happens when the worst finally arrives? Here's what is happening across Canada, why firefighters are struggling to keep up, and why experts believe the most dangerous weeks of the season may still be ahead. Right now, Canada is fighting wildfires on a scale few countries could realistically manage. As of this week, around 857 active wildfires are burning across the country. More than 700 of those fires are officially classified as out of control. That isn't dramatic language chosen for headlines. It is an official operational classification. It means firefighters have not contained the flames. They are not steering them. They are not holding them behind fire lines. The fires are spreading according to the weather, the wind, and the fuel in front of them. In many cases, nobody can stop them. The numbers continue to grow almost by the hour. During one day in mid-July alone, 21 new wildfires ignited. That's nearly 1 new fire every hour, while hundreds of others were already burning. Since the beginning of the year, Canada has recorded more than 3,100 wildfires, consuming approximately 1.4 million hectares of land, around 3.5 million acres. For most countries, those numbers would define an extraordinarily destructive fire season. But this is where the story becomes far more alarming. Because by the standards Canadian scientists actually use to measure wildfire seasons, 2026 still isn't considered extreme. It remains below the recent average for total land burned. That single fact changes the entire perspective. If a below-average season can still produce hundreds of uncontrollable fires, military deployments, widespread evacuations, deadly smoke, and civilian deaths, then the upper limit of this crisis hasn't even been reached. The phrase, out of control, deserves a closer look, because it's often misunderstood. Many people hear those words and imagine firefighters simply failing to stop the flames. The reality is much more complicated. Canada's fires burn across some of the largest wilderness areas on Earth. Many ignite hundreds of kilometers from paved roads. Others start deep inside dense boreal forests, where there are no permanent communities, no reliable water sources, and no practical way to move heavy equipment. When hundreds of fires erupt simultaneously, emergency agencies have no choice but to prioritize. Communities come first. Lives come first. Critical infrastructure comes first. The remote fires often receive little or no direct suppression, not because officials don't care, but because reaching them may be physically impossible. In those situations, firefighters are forced to wait for something they cannot control. Rain, higher humidity, a shift in the wind. Until the weather changes, many fires simply continue burning. So when more than 700 fires carry the label out of control at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean nobody is responding. It means the wildfire system itself has been pushed beyond the capacity of available crews. Comparing this season to last year reveals something even more surprising. At this same point in 2025, Canada had actually recorded fewer fires than it has now. But those fires had already burned roughly 4.6 million hectares, more than 3 times the area destroyed so far this year. So 2026 has produced more ignitions, but less total burned land. On paper, that makes this a quieter season. And yet 2 provinces have declared emergencies. Thousands have fled their homes. The military has already been deployed. 2 civilians have lost their lives. Entire regions remain covered in smoke. If this is considered below average, then Canada's wildfire baseline has changed dramatically. Officials are particularly concerned because the most dangerous weather may still be ahead. Environment and Climate Change Canada is forecasting warmer than normal temperatures across much of the country through August. Many of the regions already burning, including Manitoba, northwestern Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia, and the Northwest Territories, are expected to remain unusually dry. Those conditions matter because wildfire behavior can change incredibly fast. A fire that smolders quietly for days can suddenly explode into a fast-moving wall of flames after only a few days of intense heat, lower humidity, and stronger winds. Federal officials have described the season in unusually direct terms. It may have started slowly, but it started under high-risk conditions. In other words, what Canada is experiencing today may not be the peak of this wildfire season. It may simply be the beginning. For many Canadians, wildfire has always been part of summer. It meant smoky skies, temporary evacuations, a cabin lost deep in the forest, sometimes even an entire neighborhood destroyed. But this year, the crisis crossed a line that had rarely been crossed before. It began taking lives. As the fires continued spreading across the country, provincial governments slowly reached a conclusion they had hoped to avoid. This was no longer a disaster that local firefighters could manage alone. It had become a national emergency. Both Manitoba and Saskatchewan declared province-wide states of emergency as wildfire activity intensified beyond available resources. Officials described conditions as unprecedented. Large portions of both provinces were placed under extreme wildfire danger, where a single spark could rapidly become an uncontrollable blaze. A state of emergency is far more than a public announcement. It gives governments extraordinary powers they rarely use. Authorities can order mandatory evacuations, redirect emergency resources, close highways, restrict access to entire regions, and mobilize equipment wherever it is needed most. Those powers exist for one reason. When every minute matters, waiting is no longer an option. But even emergency declarations could not erase the human cost. This wildfire season has already claimed multiple lives. Several firefighters have died while battling the blazes. Then came the news that changed everything. In the small Manitoba community of Lac-du-Bonnet, 2 civilians lost their lives during a wildfire. For the province, these were believed to be the first civilian wildfire deaths in recent memory. That statistic carries far more weight than it appears to. For decades, Manitobans have lived with wildfire seasons. People expected smoke. They expected evacuations. They expected property damage. What they did not expect was that ordinary residents would lose their lives. Once that threshold is crossed, the entire conversation changes. Wildfires stop being viewed as seasonal disasters. They become immediate threats to human survival. Another sign of how serious the situation had become arrived shortly afterward. The Canadian military was deployed. Armed forces are not wildfire specialists. Governments do not call in soldiers simply because a fire season is difficult. They are deployed only when the civilian emergency system begins running out of capacity, when there are more fires than firefighters, more evacuations than transportation resources, more isolated communities than local agencies can safely reach. The military becomes the country's backup plan. In several communities, soldiers assisted with evacuations, helping move families to safety after roads became threatened or local resources were overwhelmed. That image alone tells the story. When an army is helping civilians escape advancing wildfires, the emergency has already grown beyond the limits of ordinary disaster response. The scale of displacement is unlike anything many communities have experienced. Across Canada, more than 33,000 people have already been forced to leave their homes. For thousands of families, evacuation meant grabbing only a few personal belongings before driving away without knowing whether anything would remain when they returned. Some may not return for weeks. Others may find nothing left. Manitoba has carried much of that burden. Roughly 17,000 residents there have been placed under evacuation orders. Many sought shelter in Winnipeg. Others were transported hundreds of kilometers away, staying in hotels and temporary accommodations while waiting for updates about homes they could no longer reach. Every passing day brings the same unanswered question: will there still be a home to return to? Among those affected most severely are Canada's Indigenous communities. Many First Nations are located in remote forest regions where a single wildfire can isolate an entire community. As fires expanded across northern Manitoba, several First Nations were forced to evacuate. Thousands of Indigenous residents suddenly found themselves displaced, leaving behind homes, schools, health centers, and generations of community history. For some villages, evacuation is far more complicated than simply getting into a car. Limited road access means helicopters, aircraft, or military assistance may become the only safe way out. That is exactly what happened in parts of Manitoba, where Canadian armed forces helped evacuate vulnerable communities before fire conditions deteriorated further. These stories are not isolated incidents. They are unfolding across the country. Earlier this season, residents in West Kelowna, British Columbia, were ordered to evacuate after a rapidly advancing wildfire threatened neighborhoods on the city's edge. Hundreds of people left within hours as emergency crews raced to protect homes. Thousands of kilometers away in Nova Scotia, Another wildfire tore through roughly 8,500 hectares, destroying around 20 homes and forcing families to watch entire neighborhoods disappear. Every province has its own version of this story. Different landscapes, different communities, the same uncertainty, people leaving with whatever they can carry, firefighters racing against changing winds, families refreshing emergency alerts, hoping their town isn't the next name added to the growing list. And yet, despite all of this destruction, for most of the people who will ultimately be affected by Canada's wildfire season, they will never actually see the flames. Because the largest danger is no longer the fire itself, it's the smoke. And that smoke is about to carry this disaster far beyond Canada's borders. Here's the strange reality of this wildfire season. For the overwhelming majority of people affected by these fires, the flames will never come anywhere near them. They won't watch forests burn, they won't hear helicopters overhead, they won't receive an evacuation order, and yet they'll still breathe the consequences. Because the most powerful weapon these fires produce isn't the fire itself, it's the smoke. And unlike flames, smoke doesn't stop at a provincial border. It doesn't stop at an international border. It doesn't even stop at an ocean. As massive wildfires continued burning across Canada, enormous plumes of smoke began drifting south into the United States. Within days, more than 100 million Americans were living beneath degraded air quality, from the Midwest to the Great Lakes. Across the Northeast and into the Mid-Atlantic, entire regions watched the sky slowly change color. In New York City and Boston, familiar skylines faded behind a dull yellow-gray haze. Visibility dropped dramatically. The sun appeared dimmer. The air carried the unmistakable smell of burning forests, even though the nearest flames were hundreds, and in some cases thousands of miles away. For millions of people, the disaster arrived without fire. It arrived through the atmosphere. The government response quickly reflected just how widespread the smoke had become. Michigan issued a statewide air quality alert. Minnesota followed, then Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, much of New England. On one day alone, the United States had more than 180 active air quality alerts alongside numerous dense smoke advisories stretching across multiple states. Forecasters warned conditions could continue deteriorating as shifting winds pushed additional smoke into heavily populated regions. Think about what that really means. Someone living in Philadelphia walks outside before work. The air smells strange. The skyline looks unusually hazy. Their phone displays an air quality warning. Yet the fire responsible may be burning over 1,000 miles away, deep inside a Canadian forest they'll never see. That is the extraordinary reach of wildfire smoke. The fire stays in one place. Its consequences do not. This is usually where another conversation begins online. Every major wildfire season brings a flood of viral claims. Some insist the fires were deliberately started. Others claim they're part of coordinated arson campaigns. And every year, more extreme theories appear, suggesting mysterious technologies or secret weapons somehow ignited hundreds of fires simultaneously. The reality is both simpler and, in many ways, more unsettling. Yes, some individual wildfires are caused by people. Human negligence happens. Arson exists. But those isolated cases cannot explain hundreds of simultaneous fires scattered across one of the largest wilderness regions on Earth. Canada's northern forests stretch for thousands of kilometers. Many of these fires ignite in places without roads, without towns, without permanent human activity. The ingredients driving this wildfire season are well understood. Lightning, dry forests, high temperatures, low humidity, strong winds. Those ordinary forces are more than capable of producing a season like this. No extraordinary explanation is required. The frightening truth isn't that something mysterious is happening. It's that nature already has everything it needs. Then another number emerged that stunned even air quality experts. Earlier this week, Toronto briefly recorded the worst air quality of any major city on Earth. Not among the worst. The worst. For a short period, one of North America's cleanest and most developed cities ranked above megacities long associated with chronic pollution. Officials issued air quality warnings as smoke pouring from northwestern Ontario spread across southern Canada. The fires responsible were nowhere near downtown Toronto, yet millions of residents found themselves breathing some of the most polluted air on the planet. That moment shattered a common assumption. Most people associate severe air pollution with decades of industrial growth, heavy traffic, or rapidly expanding megacities. Toronto fit none of those expectations. its air changed in a matter of days. Not because anything inside the city had changed, but because the wind had. And even then, the smoke wasn't finished traveling. Scientists monitoring the atmosphere over Europe began detecting something remarkable. Smoke from Canada's wildfires had crossed the entire Atlantic Ocean. Carried thousands of kilometers by powerful upper-level winds, tiny particles from burning Canadian forests reached parts of Western Europe. This wasn't an isolated event. Similar transatlantic smoke transport had already been documented during recent wildfire seasons, but each new occurrence reinforces the same reality. A wildfire burning in remote Manitoba or northern Ontario is no longer just a Canadian emergency. It becomes an international air quality event. The cause remains hidden inside an isolated forest. The effects appear across continents. A yellow sky over New York. Air quality alerts in Detroit. Asthma warnings in Boston. Atmospheric sensors detecting Canadian smoke over Europe. This is what it truly means when experts say the fires have escaped containment. They're no longer spreading only across forests. They're spreading through the atmosphere itself. And that makes this story far bigger than Canada alone. But while the smoke is easy to see, the greatest danger is almost completely invisible. And understanding that invisible threat explains why health experts are taking this wildfire season so seriously. At first glance, wildfire smoke doesn't always look especially threatening. Sometimes it's obvious: a thick gray cloud, a yellow sky, the smell of burning wood drifting through the air. But on many days, the danger is far less dramatic. The sky looks only slightly hazy. The sun seems a little dimmer than usual. You might not smell anything at all. And that's exactly what makes wildfire smoke so dangerous. Because the greatest threat isn't what you can see, it's what you can't. The tiny pollutant health experts worry about most is called PM 2.5, or fine particulate matter. These particles are incredibly small, measuring 2.5 micrometers or less. To understand just how tiny that is, imagine a single human hair. Now divide its width by about 30. That's roughly the size of one PM 2.5 particle. Wildfires release billions of these microscopic particles into the atmosphere. Together, they make up the overwhelming majority of the pollution produced by wildfire smoke. And their size is exactly what makes them so dangerous. Your body has natural defenses against ordinary dust. Larger particles get trapped inside your nose. Others stick to the throat before they ever reach your lungs. It's a filtration system your body has relied on your entire life. But PM 2.5 slips past nearly all of those defenses. The particles travel deep into the smallest air sacs inside your lungs. From there, some are small enough to pass into the bloodstream itself. That's the moment wildfire smoke stops being an air quality problem. It becomes a whole body health problem. Short-term exposure can trigger a wide range of symptoms: burning eyes, persistent coughing, headaches, chest tightness, difficulty breathing. For healthy adults, those symptoms are often temporary. But for millions of others, the consequences can be much more serious. People with asthma may experience sudden attacks. Those living with chronic lung disease can find breathing dramatically harder. Older adults and people with heart conditions face increased cardiovascular stress. Hospitals often begin seeing measurable increases in emergency room visits within days of major smoke events. The smoke doesn't have to remain for weeks. Sometimes just a few days are enough. There's another misconception that catches many people by surprise. Most people judge the air by their senses. If they smell smoke, they assume the air is unhealthy. If the smell disappears, they assume the danger is gone. Unfortunately, wildfire smoke doesn't work that way. The microscopic particles responsible for most of the health risk are often impossible to smell. You may breathe hazardous air without noticing anything unusual. That's why health agencies consistently tell people not to trust their nose. Instead, they rely on the Air Quality Index, or AQI. The monitor often detects dangerous conditions long before your body does, by the time coughing or breathing problems begin. The exposure has already happened. Researchers have also discovered something even more concerning. Not all air pollution affects the human body equally. Wildfire smoke appears to be more harmful than the same amount of pollution produced by traffic or industry. At first, that seems difficult to understand. After all, a particle is a particle. But chemically, wildfire smoke is very different. As forests burn, they release a complex mixture of organic compounds. Many of those compounds generate highly reactive molecules inside the lungs, increasing inflammation and oxidative stress. In simple terms, your lungs react more aggressively to wildfire smoke than they do to ordinary urban pollution. The same concentration can cause significantly greater damage. That's one reason doctors closely monitor wildfire smoke events, even in cities that normally experience moderate air pollution. The people at greatest risk are exactly who you'd expect: young children whose lungs are still developing, older adults, pregnant women, anyone living with asthma, coped, heart disease, or other respiratory illnesses. For these groups, wildfire smoke isn't simply uncomfortable. It can become medically dangerous very quickly. And this year's wildfire season has introduced another complication. The smoke has arrived during periods of intense summer heat. Normally, during a heat wave, people are advised to open windows overnight and allow cooler air to circulate through their homes. During a smoke event, the advice completely reverses. Close every window. Seal the house. Keep outdoor air outside. Run air conditioning on recirculation whenever possible. The problem is obvious. When extreme heat and heavy smoke arrive together, the safest response to one hazard becomes the opposite response for the other. Imagine an elderly person living without air conditioning. Do they open the windows and let dangerous smoke inside? Or keep everything closed while indoor temperatures continue climbing? Neither option is truly safe. It's a choice between two different risks, and experts warn this overlap is becoming increasingly common across North America. Heat waves, wildfire smoke, and prolonged drought are beginning to arrive together, creating compound emergencies that are far more difficult than any one hazard alone. By now, one thing should be clear. The smoke drifting across North America is not simply the result of bad luck. It is the visible outcome of a much larger system that has been building for weeks. And to understand why these fires have become so widespread, we need to look beyond the flames themselves and examine the weather patterns fueling them. To understand where this wildfire season is heading, you have to look beyond the fires themselves. The flames are only the final chapter. The story actually begins much higher, in the atmosphere. For weeks, weather conditions across large parts of North America have been quietly setting the stage for exactly this kind of disaster. A persistent dome of heat has lingered over much of the continent. Temperatures have remained above seasonal averages. Rainfall has become increasingly limited, and every extra day of heat pulls more moisture out of the forests. Trees begin to dry, shrubs become brittle. Even the soil loses much of the water that normally slows a fire's advance. Little by little, entire landscapes become fuel. Then all it takes is a single spark. The problem isn't limited to Canada. Large portions of the United States are also experiencing unusually dry conditions. Across much of the continent, forests that would normally resist fire are becoming increasingly vulnerable. Once vegetation loses enough moisture, wildfires begin behaving differently. They spread faster, burn hotter, and become dramatically harder to control. That's why firefighters often say they don't just fight flames, they fight the weather. And right now, the weather isn't helping. Scientists are also watching another major influence developing over the Pacific Ocean. Climate patterns linked to El Niño continue reshaping weather across much of the northern hemisphere. These large-scale ocean changes influence where heat builds, where storms develop, and just as importantly, where rain never arrives. No single weather pattern can explain every wildfire. But when unusually warm temperatures combine with prolonged dryness, they create conditions where forests become exceptionally flammable. It's the combination that matters. Heat, dry vegetation, low humidity, wind. Together, they create an environment where even relatively small fires can grow into massive wildfire complexes. Scientists are also studying another concern that extends far beyond this summer. Canada's vast boreal forests represent one of the largest natural carbon stores on Earth. For thousands of years, trees, peatlands, and forest soils have quietly locked away enormous amounts of carbon. Normally, these forests help slow climate change by absorbing more carbon than they release. But severe wildfire seasons can temporarily reverse that balance. When millions of hectares burn, decades, or even centuries of stored carbon return to the atmosphere in just a few weeks, that creates an unsettling possibility. More fires release more carbon. More carbon contributes to additional warming. Additional warming dries forests even further, which increases the likelihood of future wildfires. Scientists describe this as a feedback loop. They're careful not to say the cycle has become permanent. No single fire season can prove that. But recent years have certainly captured their attention. Canada experienced its worst wildfire season on record in 2023. Another historically destructive season followed in 2025. Now, 2026 is already producing hundreds of uncontrolled fires, despite still being classified as below average for total area burned. That pattern alone is enough to raise difficult questions about where future fire seasons may be heading. And that's what makes forecasting so difficult. No one can say with certainty how the rest of this summer will unfold. A period of sustained rainfall could slow many of these fires. Cooler temperatures could reduce fire behavior. Stronger humidity could help firefighters regain control. But the opposite is equally possible. Canadian forecasters continue warning that hotter than average temperatures and continued dryness are expected through much of August. If those forecasts prove accurate, the fires burning today may have access to even drier fuel in the weeks ahead. History has shown how quickly conditions can change. A season that appears manageable in July can become historic by August. That's exactly why officials remain so cautious. Over the coming weeks, there are 3 developments worth watching closely. The first is the number of fires officially classified as out of control. If that number continues rising, it suggests suppression efforts are falling further behind. The second is the evacuation count. Every new evacuation order represents another community directly threatened by advancing flames. And finally, watch the weather. Temperature, rainfall, humidity. Those 3 variables may ultimately determine whether 2026 remains a difficult wildfire season or becomes another record-breaking one. For now, one reality is impossible to ignore. A country is burning in more than 800 different places. More than 700 of those fires remain beyond containment. Thousands of families have already been forced from their homes. Smoke has spread across North America, reached more than 100 million people, and even crossed the Atlantic Ocean into Europe. Yet despite everything you've seen, Canada's own experts continue delivering the same warning. The most dangerous part of the wildfire season may still lie ahead. The forests are dry, the atmosphere is primed, and the story is still unfolding. We'll continue following every major development as the situation evolves.